For those of us who were fortunate enough to attend the Washington World Philatelic Exhibition in Washington, D.C. in 2006, wasn't it six? Mark, 2006, okay. We were able to enjoy the fruits of Mark's labor because he was the main organizer of the Pitcairn Island Study Group's activities there, and the activities were numerous and very, very exciting. He then became the president of the Pitcairn Island Study Group from 2007 to 2011. He designed the PISG website, www.pisg.net, and has been webmaster for more than 4 years. He's written many articles for the PISG log, the Pitcairn log, and his wife, Mary Ann, is the production, or was the production editor of the Pitcairn log. Did a fabulous job. It's absolutely, the graphics are absolutely stunning. Mark has a marvelous perspective of Pitcairn through philately and history, and he's going to share that with us in his talk, Pitcairn Island, Post Office, and Community.
Okay, great. It's commonplace now to speak disparagingly of postal institutions. This is especially the case in the United States, and I think also in Britain. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me while I review some of the Pitcairn Island postal operations and actually say a few positive things about them. The origins of the post office, of course, are informal. They had rather dubious delivery. In the old days, ship letters would be given to captains or other officers of passing ships, and many times were asked to be entered into the postal stream as a favor. The top cover you see there is one of the earliest covers from Pitcairn going to Brighton in England in 1855, sent via Chile and Panama. This is a good cover because it actually reached its destination. This practice continued for quite a long time. We see on the bottom here an example from 1922, Pitcairn to our old friend Gerald Bliss, postmaster out in the canal zone. And the only thing that they wrote on here was Pitcairn Island free, and that was enough to get it through in this particular case. But as I said, it was kind of a hit or miss operation. Okay, good. Later on, in the mid-20s, the postal operations became somewhat more, somewhat more regular, but still informal. Bliss provided a scheme to enter Pitcairn letters into the international mail stream. If the letters had got up to the canal, he would make sure that they got forwarded on to the proper authorities. He even went so far as to provide hand stamps to explain the situation. You see here the famous posted at Pitcairn Island, no stamps available cachets, which are quite valuable now. This top cover was sent about 1923 out to Boston to a Mrs. Washburn. She paid postage due, and the bottom cover out to London, another postage due cover. Now, Bliss's scheme was in operation for a couple of years until basically the British were embarrassed into providing a more official solution. The idea that an American postmaster would be stepping in and doing the work that the British should have been doing was now viewed as an embarrassment that really shouldn't be allowed to continue. So a scheme was set up with the New Zealanders. A New Zealand agency was set up on the island. It was in operation from 1927 to 1940. This was a practice where the New Zealand Post Office would provide service to a few remote islands in the Pacific. And in 1927, Pitcairn Island became one of those islands. Now, the great thing is that now Pitcairners could prepay letters. They had stamps. And this was a practice that had been adopted throughout most of the rest of the world in the 1860s. And now in 1927, that practice is coming to Pitcairn. Another great thing was that they could now send registered letters, which means that they could send money to people. They could order things. We have here a cover going to, a registered letter going to Montgomery Ward in Chicago, a competitor of Sears, I guess the modern day equivalent would be sort of a Walmart, although maybe slightly higher end, if my memory of Montgomery Ward is accurate. So the Sears catalogs and Montgomery catalogs that the Islanders would have had for a long time, you know, and looked at all the stuff and say, look at all this great stuff, but we can't order anything. Well, now they could. And now they had reasonable expectation that the material that they ordered would be delivered. Of course, nobody was totally happy with the situation. The British weren't happy because New Zealand stamps were being used on the island. It made it look like the islands had been transferred to New Zealand control, when in fact they were still British islands. The New Zealanders didn't like it at all because they didn't like the accounting that was being done by the islanders. Maybe it was an education issue. That could very well be that, you know, they didn't quite go out and maybe set everything up quite correctly and explain everything. And the Pitcairners also had problems. I mean, definitely it was an improvement because it was a formal operation. It was there were regular activities going on, but they were also running out of stamps occasionally, and sometimes more than occasionally. And here we see one of these examples. This is kind of a postal tape, gummed postal tape, and this I think would have been put on a parcel coming from the island. They used the agency hand stamp here to make it look somewhat official, and then they had this typewritten endorsement: no stamps available at Pitcairn Post Office for 60 days. Collect postage in USA. So maybe it got through and maybe it didn't. In 1937, a British civil servant went out and was doing various studies, and he came to Pitcairn, and one of his recommendations was that a Pitcairn Island post office be established, and that stamps, Pitcairn stamps, be printed. And fortunately, those recommendations were adopted. And in 1940, the post office is established, October 15th, 1940. Some other British civil servants, Mr. Maud and Mr. Fuller, set up the processes and procedures for the post office. They arranged for stamps to be designed and produced. Mr. Fuller went out to the island. I'm not sure if Maud made it, but Fuller did, and set things up and got things going. And the most critical thing, I think, was that they did a really good job on the stamps, the first 8 stamps. Now here we have the halfpenny. We have the halfpenny issue, and this is a specimen. The word specimen is perforated into the stamp. And we have the origins here with the king, of course. The 1 penny they decided to embrace the mutiny. And this is 5 years after the Mutiny on the Bounty movie, which of course was a big hit around the world. So Fletcher Christian is on here with the king and Pitcairn. On the 1.5, we have the famous portrait of John Adams, another mutineer, and the famous picture of his house. But on the 2 penny, we have the Bounty, and we have Captain Bligh. We have to have some link to the authority figure here. We are British after all. So Bligh is put on there. Obviously not a popular stamp among the islanders. And I think they chose this rate, 2 penny, because it didn't actually pay anything. It didn't pay any particular rate, so it wouldn't have been used very much on the island. It was available, not used very much. There's also the 3 penny, which is an educational stamp showing you where Pitcairn is. That's a good idea. And the 6 penny, this is a real beauty. The Bounty in full sail with the king, a great stamp. And then on the 1 shilling, the king and Fletcher Christian with, I guess, an imaginary portrait of Fletcher. Again, a nice multicolor stamp, one of my personal favorites. And finally, the high value, which was a 2 and 6, which was good because it wasn't 10 shillings. It wasn't a pound. It meant that if you were a collector, you could buy this whole set for not a lot of money. And again, Fletcher makes his reappearance on the high value along with an island scene there. Okay, now we've produced the stamps. We've got to sell this stuff. So the authorities in Fiji and also on island produced booklets that would have the whole set of stamps, sold them for 4 and 8, and those were sold to people on passing ships and things like that. The way more successful way was to have the Crown agents forward the stamps onto stamp companies, stamp dealers. Here we have an approval sheet from the Gotham Stamp and Coin Company of Springfield, Massachusetts. And this would have been about 1952, 53, something like that, and you could get it for 90 cents. So that's the way most of these stamps were sold. And of course, there was a benefit to the islanders. Now we had enough stamps. And here we have a non-philatelic first day cover going from Stella Young to a son in New Zealand, sent on the first day. It must have been a happy occasion to have this new service available right then and there. So now the post office becomes a profit center. The money is rolling in. In 1946, the first stamps were issued in 1940. 1946, the peace issue comes out, and that's a 2 penny stamp and a 3 penny stamp. So they're pulling in more money. But then in 1948, they decide to really go for it. They decide to issue stamps to commemorate the royal silver wedding, and that's a normal occasion where you would issue stamps, and all the colonies did. And they issued a 10 shilling stamp for Pitcairn. So the previous high value was 2 and 6, and most of the stamps that were sold were like 1 penny, 2 penny. Now they've issued a 10 shilling stamp. On the right here, we have a letter from then Postmaster Roy Clark, and most of the letter is a usual Roy letter. A lot of complaining about his health, a lot of complaints. But in the middle here, he does write a paragraph about this stamp. He says, why in the world they should issue a 10 shilling stamp for Pitcairn, I fail to see. Sounds ridiculous. It seems that the government is pandering to stamp collectors. The stamp business to me is all a fraud anyway, a money-making business from start to finish. So don't hold back, Roy. Tell us how you feel. And he does. I don't know if this is, I would use the word fraud, but I will say that I've been collecting Pitcairn stamps for a long time, and I've never seen a non-philatelic usage of it. So maybe he was right. But it's a nice stamp anyway. It's a great portrait, double portrait there. So anyway, the profits, they're rolling in. Mr. Neal, who helped recommend going down this path, came back to the island in 1951, did another study. The Treasury now has 45,000 pounds in it. Now, before the post office, there was less than 100. A little over 10 years later, there's 45,000 pounds. The annual budget is over 5,000 pounds a year. So one of the first things, they're doing infrastructure projects. Here's the school, constructed in 49. And this was a school that, if a British person saw it or an American person saw it, would say, oh, that's a school. They would recognize it as a school. So all these great things are happening. The only problem is that 93% of government revenue is now coming from stamp sales. So there's not a lot of diversification of revenue sources, which maybe they didn't care about diversification, but stamp collectors are a fickle lot, and I certainly wouldn't count on them. I never have. But anyway, for now, they have a lot of money. The post office has also served, obviously, as a communications facilitator. And now we can get more regular communications with the diaspora. Here we have this really cute letter. It's in the hand of Floyd McCoy, and it's going to Ben Christian on Norfolk. I don't know if it's Irma's Ben Christian or some other Ben Christian, but it's a Ben Christian. And he's on Norfolk. And it's an airmail letter. It was posted in 1953. So now there's regular exchanges now. This can happen. So 100 years, almost 100 years, after the island is evacuated to Norfolk, and then a few years later, a few of them come back, now there can be some real communication that doesn't cost very much and gets through. So a great thing there. Post office is communications facility continuing. Advertising. Advertising hits Pitcairn. Civilizations rise and fall, but advertising lives on. Here we have what is called a Dear Doctor card. And these were sent by drug companies to doctors advertising their wares. This particular one was going to France. Message is in French, posted at Pitcairn. Here we have something, a card from the World Exchange Club Cosmos of Sweden, whatever that was, and going out to some guy in California. So, again, Pitcairn is helping to advertise stuff. Oh, there we go. Also, newsletters. Obviously, the Miscellany is the most famous one, and you would get these sent out to you from the island back then, anyway. This example is kind of interesting because it's going to our old friend Wilf Bloom when he was resident in Cape Town, and of course, Wilf being Wilf, he had to have it sent airmail registered. Why, I don't know. Why a newsletter had to be sent registered, I don't know. But mostly they were sent at a printed matter rate, and that would have been 2 cents or 4 cents depending on when it had been sent. And so these newsletters could be sent out all over the world for very little money. And again, so you're marketing the island. You're educating people around the world about the island. Pitcairn also served as a relay point. Neal made a note of this in his study. Here's an example of a letter sent by a merchant sailor who was sailing through the canal down to New Zealand. And he's a guy named Julian Simons. He was on the James Roy Wells, and the James Ward Wells was part of the American Foreign Steamship Company. And he's probably writing his brother or his father back on 94th Street in Manhattan. And that's a rather Tony address now, I must say, but I don't know what it was back in 1947. Anyway, so what would happen is the ship was, in this case, the ship's coming down from the canal, going towards New Zealand. They stop at Pitcairn. He posts his letter, and then a few days later, another ship came along, and they put the letter back on, and it went back up to the canal, and then finally on to New York. And so one of the most remote islands in the world is now an effective postal relay point. Who knew? Who knew? And here's another one, and this one was going from a ship passenger to back to England. Eventually, though, this practice becomes obsolete because of the delivery of the Boeing 707 to Qantas in Australia back in 1959. So instead of having to take a passenger ship, if you're going from New Zealand to England or Canada or wherever, you could now cross over to Australia and in 36 hours be anywhere in the world, rather than spending 6 weeks on a ship. So that kind of killed that off. Again, there was also a telegram service. They were facilitating commerce. You could transfer money now. Here's a British postal order that's in particular for Pitcairn Island. You could order things. There was a parcel post service. The Pitcairn Souvenir Agency sent out this brochure, and you could order all sorts of stuff from Pitcairn. You could order a box for your Bible, a Panama hat, all these other souvenirs, and you could get that shipped out to you. And here's a customs declaration. This particular shipment was a basket, 6 kilos worth of baskets. And here's a parcel bill, and I'm running out of time. But here's a more recent item. This is from 2006. This was a banana shipment to Marcia Fox in New York. And we have a problem here because the postage on it is $45 to send a load of bananas to Marcia. So you see that the business model is now starting to break down a bit. $45 bananas, $45 bananas. I mean, they might be great bananas, but it's still $45. So basically what we see here is the rates for parcels that have been just going skyrocketing. Just as an example here, 5 kilos back in 1971, 65 cents, any country in the world. To Europe via the USPS, $50 now. So a 100-fold increase, and that obviously is causing problems. The post office has also reinforced the link to the crown. You see the Queen's portrait or the Queen's, the royal cipher on all stamps. There have been 500 stamps, so this has been reinforced 500 times. This may have been relevant during the recent trials when some folks tried to say, Pitcairn really isn't a British island. And the Privy Council, maybe some of them were stamp collectors and were familiar with these stamps, said, ha, 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 no, you're a British island and British law applies. And the post office is also linking Pitcairn, kind of establishing it as a country in the international world, especially with the UPU. So they've been a full member of the UPU since, I think, about 39 or 1940. Here's a folder, souvenir folder, that would have been given to delegates at the UPU conference by the Pitcairn delegate. And finally, the post office as family glue, I call it, jail mail, some of us call it. There had been no real reason to have an internal letter service on Pitcairn until recently. They had always specified rates, but nobody ever used them. Well, now the rates started to come in, actually have practical meaning. And so here we see a letter from Randy to Nadine back in 2007. Doesn't contain the letter. I can imagine what the letter says, and probably you can too, but 10 cents, 8 cents US would send your letter from the jail to the destination. So the conclusions here, over the past 70 years, the post office has funded a modernization and infrastructure expansion, marketing, publicizing the island, binding the diaspora more closely to the home island, facilitating an export business, helping to continue on-island family relationships, binding the country to the British Crown, and by extension to Britain, and by further extension, the European community, and helping to establish the idea of Pitcairn as a country, although not an independent country, obviously. How it's going to be in the future? Well, there'll still be a funding source, although at a lower level. Although you can help by buying something from the Philatelic Bureau, who's out here during the break. Also, facilitating the export of merchandise, but again, something probably needs to happen to fix the huge charges that are being faced. Marketing or serving tourists, and maybe possibly in the future supporting seabed mining and seabed miners, because that's the big new area now. And Pitcairn, because it's 4 islands that are rather dispersed, covers probably 400,000 or 500,000 square miles of ocean floor. What's down there? I don't know, but it could be good. So we could have miners coming to Pitcairn. Whether that's a good thing, whether Pitcairners want miners there, I don't know, but they could arrive someday. And that's it. Thank you.